All right, so we did the holistic view of human relations and technology. And kind of the start of this, during our introduction, we talked about the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect kind of incorporated in about 1923, and it's quite amazing. So if this group right here is just a group of factory workers, and they're working along, and I come in, and this is 1923, so, you know, maybe the Model T or something like that. I come in and I just say that we're watching you do your work, and we're just going to study you. So kind of that placebo effect. Within that point, they also took down their pay. They maybe changed the lighting around. The interesting part about it is Elliot Mayo, who actually conducted the study, noticed that the productivity went up because these individuals felt they were being studied. And so that kind of started the human relations trend that we're kind of going to go into today. So next we're going to talk about social relations, employees, satisfaction, and training. So next, Lauren.
Okay, so technically a social relation is a social interaction that occurs between two or more people, and it can be between two different groups of people. And they tend to be regulated by social norms, and they occur frequently and everywhere. Being as humans are social, and they have to feel the need to belong or be associated with a group. So with that being said, the number one form of social relation is communication. And it's very common, and people are able to acquire all different types of information. And since it's so vast, I've decided to only talk about the four and give a brief history on them. The written word, of course, you have just this timeline for you. I won't go too much into it, but as you can see it, as I take it away. The printed word, then you have 1049 to 1714, and the first movable type was actually made of clay. And then you had Gutenberg's printing press was the first metal movable type, which led to the first newspapers and everything associated with print. Then you have the telephone. In 1876, there was the first patent by Alexander Graham Bell. And then in 1889, there was the direct dial telephones. 1894, it was the wireless telegraphy. And in 1898, there was the first answering machine. 1898. Then it moved on to the cell phone, which is the first cellular phone company was established in Japan, and that was in 1979. And it didn't make it into the United States until 1983. And then by 1985, there was a widespread of cell phones used in cars. Then we have computers and the internet. The first computer was the Harvard's Mark I, and that was in 1944, and it was only used by the government. And then in 1951, the computers were sold commercially. In 1969, there was the first form of the internet, and it was the ARPA net, which stands for Advanced Research Projects Agency, and it was in the military. And in 1994, the internet and the World Wide Web came to the United States.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about employee satisfaction in technology. Like Andy had said, a lot of different, the Hawthorne effect and things started, all of the human relations portion. But what happens when you add technology? First of all, a lot of universities, corporations, organizations have a big concern with satisfaction of their employees. And a lot of times, companies started seeing if their employees weren't happy, their retention went down, and they had a high turnover rate. So a lot of companies started doing things such as surveys to see the satisfaction of their employees. These surveys then turned to technology as, the technology emerged. It's beginning to be vast and huge. And there are two ways that you can survey your company as far as technology goes, and you can do outsourcing. There are lots of different organizations and companies that will do your surveys for you. So you can just contact them and be like, this is what I want on my survey. Can you, go ahead and do that for us. Or if you want to save money, companies also do in-house training. They use MySQL. They use forms and databasing that they can do that themselves. So that's wonderful. And then always the tried and true, the incentives It can be free meals, free vacation days, things of that nature, to get people to do the surveys to see about employee satisfaction. But also an incentive with technology is that it's fast, it's quick, and it takes about 5 minutes instead of having to fill out a form by hand. So employee satisfaction and technology.
Okay, and last I'm going to talk about training in technology. Sorry, Megan. When training started out, I think it was very basic. It was usually in a classroom setting. Maybe they had some Post-its on the board or something, and they would write everything on that. And now we see training move into more technological basis. This happened for a couple of reasons. First of all, the amount of information that employees have to learn these days doubles every 5 to 7 years. So those who are trainers in the corporate setting are constantly having to train people and update the information. They started to move this more into an online setting because it requires 25 to 60% less time to train online than it does to train in a classroom setting. And that's where just-in-time training came into effect. This is the idea that you set up the training so that when the employees are ready to learn, that training is right at their fingertips. And there's a couple ways that they've done this. The first is the interactive multimedia training, which is basically computer-based training where the employees can retrieve the information whenever they need it. This is something that usually isn't updated often, so a good example of this is that AT&T does all of their employee orientation and things like their mission statements, their values, all the basic information the employee needs to know firsthand. They do that all on CDs and give that as their training to the employees. So that way the information doesn't have to be updated, it's right at their fingertips, and they always have audio and full motion video in them. There's also videotaped testimonials in them from senior staff members telling them how to deal with certain situations when they encounter them, because they found that employees basically learn best from each other. On the other hand, if you're going to need to update information often, you would want to use the electronic performance support. This is an electronic job aid that kind of serves as a reference library. So you'll find this a lot if you're working for an airline or telecommunications. So let's say Verizon Wireless, for instance. Those employees aren't being trained anymore about the different types of phones that Verizon has. They're being trained how to use a computer system, and that computer system prompts them. So when somebody calls and says, my phone's not working, this, and this is wrong, that employee is typing that into the system, and a whole bunch of prompts come up of different questions that they need to ask that customer in order to get to the root cause of their problem. So the employees aren't learning the basics anymore, they're just learning how to use the system. Hewlett-Packard does the same thing, and they have it where the employees, when they come up with something that's not in the system already, they have a way to enter it into the system, so the next person that comes across that problem, it's already been dealt with and they already know the answer to that question. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is online conferences, where if you work for a big company, instead of flying everyone into Chicago for a conference, now we're just going to have an online conference where you have experts come in, do workshops. It's broadcasted out to everybody who it's broadcasted at different times, and they can go on the internet and watch whatever workshop you need them to know about. They can download the transcripts. There's chat rooms available for them to talk to the instructor, and if they miss it, the actual workshop, they can watch it later and still email the instructor to come if they have any questions about what's going on. So basically, all these ways are just different ways in the last 10 years even that training has changed, and you can see the impact that it's had on human relations overall. And that basically sums up our presentation. Do you have any questions?
Questions? When you speak about human relations, you mean within the companies, or we talked about the communication with families, for example. Is this something that applies outside the workplace?
Well, I guess if you could say that if it was outside the company with other companies or with their customers, but it's also internal as well.
So it's all work-based? Or
yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Very well.